The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the vast fields of dry, cracked soil. The once thriving land of Jacob, a hard-working farmer, had turned barren over the past few years. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his calloused hands trembling as he stared at the empty expanse before him. The crops had failed again, and so had his hope. Jacob had always been a man of logic, relying on his own hard work and determination to get through life. He never believed in luck, miracles, or divine intervention. While the other farmers in the village prayed for rain and thanked God for every harvest, Jacob scoffed at their faith. "What good is prayer?" he often muttered under his breath. "The land doesn't need prayers. It needs effort." But no amount of effort seemed to be enough. Year after year, the drought only worsened. His debts piled up, and his family, his wife, Anna, and their young son, Samuel, began to suffer. The livestock grew weaker, and the villagers who once admired his resilience now whispered behind his back. One evening, as he sat on his wooden porch staring at the distant horizon, Anna placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Jacob, maybe it's time we pray," she said softly, her eyes filled with worry yet unwavering faith. Jacob let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Prayer won't put food on the table, Anna. It won't bring rain." She sighed, knowing there was little she could say to change his mind. But deep inside, she feared what would happen if his heart remained closed to faith. That night, as the wind howled outside, Jacob lay awake, his mind racing with thoughts of failure. His father had been a farmer before him, and his grandfather before that. They had trusted in their faith to guide them through hardships. But Jacob had always believed that hard work alone shaped a man's destiny. The next morning, as he walked toward the field, he noticed something unusual near the old oak tree at the edge of his land. A frail old man, draped in tattered clothes, stood there, staring up at the sky. His face was weathered, but his eyes held an odd sense of peace. Curious but wary, Jacob approached him. "You lost, old man?" The stranger turned to him and smiled. "No, just admiring the land. It has potential." Jacob scoffed. "If by potential you mean a hopeless stretch of dirt, then sure." The old man chuckled. "You see a barren land. I see a waiting harvest." Jacob frowned, crossing his arms. "There's no rain, no crops, no hope." The stranger studied him for a long moment. "Perhaps it is not the land that lacks hope, but the man who tends to it." Jacob felt an unexpected pang in his chest. He wanted to argue, to dismiss the old man's words, but something held him back. Before he could respond, the old man pointed toward the sky. "Rain will come, but will you be ready to receive it?" Jacob turned his gaze upward. The sky was as clear as ever, not a single cloud in sight. When he looked back down, the old man was gone. His words lingered, stirring something deep within Jacob's soul. He didn't believe in miracles, but for the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't quite explain. Little did he know, a storm was coming, not just in the sky, but within himself. And it would change everything. Jacob stood there for a long time, his eyes fixed on the spot where the old man had stood just moments ago. The words echoed in his mind. "Rain will come, but will you be ready to receive it?" He rubbed his temples, convincing himself that exhaustion was playing tricks on him. Perhaps the sun and the endless disappointment had finally pushed his mind to wander. Yet, no matter how hard he tried to shake off the encounter, the feeling lingered, like a whisper he couldn't quite silence. The following days passed with the same dull routine. Jacob rose before dawn, tilled the dry earth, and hoped against hope that something, anything, would sprout. Samuel followed him one morning, carrying a small wooden shovel, his little face determined as he dug into the hard ground beside his father. "Why isn't anything growing, Papa?" Samuel asked, his voice innocent but laced with confusion. Jacob sighed, looking at his son's dusty hands. "Because there's no rain, son. Without rain, the seeds can't grow." Samuel glanced up at the sky, then back at his father. Maybe if we ask God for rain? Jacob's jaw tightened. He wasn't angry with Samuel. He was frustrated with the world, with life, and with the idea that prayer could solve anything. Yet, he didn't want to crush the boy's spirit. Rain doesn't come just because we ask for it, buddy. We have to work hard and wait. Samuel nodded but didn't look convinced. Later that night, Jacob saw his son kneeling by the window, whispering softly with his eyes closed. When he asked what Samuel was doing, the boy simply said, "I'm asking God to help our farm." Jacob turned away, his chest tightening. He wanted to tell his son not to waste his time. But a part of him, small and stubborn, remembered the old man's words and the strange peace in his eyes. Days turned into weeks. The sky remained unforgiving, the ground cracked further, and Jacob's frustration grew. One evening, while sitting on the porch with Anna, he spoke without looking at her. "I saw someone by the old oak tree a while back. An old man. He said the rain would come." Anna's eyes widened. "What old man?" "I don't know. Never seen him before. He just appeared. Talked about hope and rain. And then he was gone." Anna squeezed his hand. "Maybe it was a sign, Jacob." He pulled his hand away and stood up. "A sign? From who? God? If God cared, he wouldn't let us suffer like this. Faith doesn't change reality." Anna didn't argue. She knew his heart was hardened by disappointment. But she also knew the land wasn't the only thing that needed healing. The next morning, Jacob decided to visit the old oak tree again. He didn't know why, but something pulled him there. As he stood beneath its sprawling branches, he kicked the dry soil beneath his feet. "If you're out there, old man, I'm here," he muttered, half expecting silence. To his surprise, a faint voice responded. "Ah, you came." Jacob's heart leaped. He turned sharply and saw the old man sitting on a low branch, legs dangling like a child. His face was calm, eyes twinkling. How did you get here?" Jacob stammered. The old man smiled. "I've always been here. You just weren't ready to see me." Jacob clenched his fists. "What kind of game are you playing? I work hard every day, and this land still won't yield a thing. And now you show up, talking about rain and hope? What do you know about any of this?" The old man's expression softened. "The earth needs water to grow, but the heart needs faith. You've given everything to this land except belief." Jacob shook his head. "Faith doesn't make crops grow. Water does." "True," the old man said. "But tell me, Jacob, why do you plant seeds if you believe nothing will grow? Isn't that faith, in its own way?" Jacob froze, the words striking deeper than he expected. He had no answer. The old man hopped down from the branch. "Prepare your fields, Jacob. The rain is coming." Jacob watched, speechless, as the man walked away and disappeared beyond the horizon. He stood there for a long time, the air around him thick with something he couldn't name. That night, as the family sat down for dinner, Jacob's mind raced. Finally, he spoke. "Tomorrow, we're going to till the fields again." Anna's eyes lit up with surprise. "But we've tried that already. The soil's too dry." "I know," Jacob said. "But we'll do it anyway." The next morning, Jacob, Anna, and Samuel worked together under the relentless sun. Neighbors passing by shook their heads, whispering about Jacob's sudden determination. "Poor man's lost his mind," they said. By midday, Samuel ran to his father and tugged his sleeve. "Papa, look." Jacob followed his son's gaze to the sky. A thin, dark cloud had appeared in the distance. His heart raced. He remembered the old man's words, "Prepare your fields. The rain is coming." But one cloud didn't mean anything, or did it? As night fell, Jacob stood by the window, watching the sky. More clouds gathered, thick and heavy. The air felt different, charged with an unfamiliar energy. He turned to Anna. Maybe Maybe it was a sign. Anna squeezed his hand, but before she could reply, a distant rumble echoed across the sky. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. Was this it? Or was it just another false hope? The rain hadn't fallen yet, but something had already begun to shift, both in the sky and within Jacob's heart. And for the first time in years, he wondered if faith wasn't as foolish as he had always believed. The night stretched on, thick and restless. Jacob sat by the window, his eyes fixed on the growing clouds. Each distant rumble of thunder sent a shiver down his spine. He wanted to believe the rain was coming, but after years of disappointment, hope felt foreign, like trying to grasp water with bare hands. Anna sat beside him, her fingers intertwined with his. Neither spoke, yet the silence between them carried a quiet prayer she dared not voice aloud. Outside, Samuel slept peacefully, unaware of the invisible battle in his father's heart. The boy had prayed again that evening, kneeling beside his bed with the same childlike trust that Jacob envied but didn't understand. "Please, God, bring rain for Papa's fields," Samuel had whispered. Jacob had stood at the doorway, watching, his chest tight with conflicting emotions. He had spent years teaching his son the value of hard work but never once encouraged faith. Yet here they were, tilling dry earth at the words of a mysterious stranger and watching the sky like hopeful dreamers. By dawn, the sky had grown darker. The sun, once relentless, was now hidden behind thick, gray clouds. The air was heavy, the scent of rain faint but unmistakable. Jacob stepped outside, the ground cool beneath his boots. He tilted his head toward the sky, waiting, listening. Anna joined him with a cup of coffee. "It feels different today," she said softly. Jacob nodded. "Yeah. But what if it doesn't rain?" Anna squeezed his arm. "Then we'll try again tomorrow." His throat tightened. He wished he could borrow her faith, even for a moment. Later that morning, Samuel ran through the fields, his laughter breaking the tension. "Papa! Papa! The birds!" Jacob turned and saw a flock of birds circling high above. The sight gave him pause. Birds rarely came during the dry season. "They know," Samuel said, eyes wide with wonder. "They know the rain is coming." Jacob wanted to believe it. The land beneath their feet, though cracked and weary, seemed to hold its breath. But the waiting was unbearable. He spent the afternoon pacing the fields, checking the soil, scanning the horizon. Every crack in the earth seemed like a reminder of his failures. By evening, the wind picked up. The sky deepened to a charcoal gray, and the faint growl of thunder grew louder. Jacob stood near the old oak tree again, half expecting the old man to reappear. But the tree stood silent. As he turned to leave, he saw something glinting at the tree's base. Kneeling, he brushed away the dirt and found a small, rusted key. It was old and unremarkable, yet something about it unsettled him. He slipped it into his pocket, unsure why. That night, the wind howled around the house, rattling the windows. Jacob lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind drifted to the key, the old man's words, and the sky that seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. Just as his eyes began to close, a sharp knock echoed from the front door. He sat up, heart racing. Anna stirred beside him. "Who would come this late?" she whispered. "I don't know," Jacob replied, already moving toward the door. He opened it cautiously. There, standing in the dim light, was the old man. His eyes, as before, were calm and knowing. "Jacob," the man greeted softly. "The rain is close, but so is doubt." Jacob gripped the doorframe. "What do you want from me?" "Faith," the old man answered. "Without it, even rain cannot bring life." Jacob clenched his jaw. "I've tilled the land. I've prepared. What more do you expect me to do?" The old man extended his hand, palm up. "The key, Jacob. You found it." Jacob's hand instinctively reached into his pocket. The metal was cool against his skin. "What does it open?" The part of you that still believes, the old man said. Bring it to the oak tree when the first raindrop falls. Jacob's mind swirled with questions, but before he could ask, the old man turned and walked away, vanishing into the night. He closed the door, his heart pounding. Anna sat up as he returned to the room. Who was it? She asked. The old man. He wants me to go to the oak tree when it starts raining. Anna's eyes searched his face. Will you? Jacob hesitated. The logical part of him screamed that it was nonsense. But the memory of that flock of birds, the gathering clouds, and the mysterious key gnawed at him. I don't know, he whispered. The hours crept by. The wind roared, bending trees and tossing leaves across the fields. The house groaned under the pressure. Samuel woke once, frightened by the noise, and Anna comforted him. Jacob stood by the window, watching the sky. Then it happened. A single raindrop hit the glass with a soft, unmistakable tap. Jacob froze. Another followed. And another. Within seconds, the sky opened, releasing sheets of rain. The dry earth drank desperately as puddles formed in moments. Anna ran to the window, eyes wide. Jacob. It's raining. But Jacob didn't respond. His hand gripped the key in his pocket as he stepped into the downpour. The rain soaked him instantly as he made his way to the oak tree. Lightning illuminated the landscape, turning the familiar path into a surreal, shadowed world. The tree loomed ahead, its trunk slick with rain. Breathless, Jacob knelt at its base and held the key in his palm. What now? He shouted into the night. Thunder answered. The ground beneath him trembled. Before his eyes, the soil cracked, then shifted. A small, rusted lockbox pushed through the mud, its surface adorned with symbols Jacob didn't recognize. His pulse raced. He inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked. The box creaked open. Inside lay a single folded piece of parchment. Jacob unfolded it, his hands shaking. The message read, Faith is not about seeing the rain, it's about preparing for it. Your harvest will come, but the true test has just begun. Jacob's heart pounded. The rain poured harder, drenching the parchment, but the ink didn't blur. The words seemed to glow faintly in the storm's light. He looked around, half expecting the old man to appear again. But he was alone. Alone with the rain, the key, and a message that left more questions than answers. Behind him, the fields that had been lifeless for years were drinking in the rain. But Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that the rain was only the beginning of something far greater and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The rain continued to fall, soaking Jacob to the bone as he crouched beside the old oak tree. The paper in his hand felt impossibly light, yet its words weighed on his chest like a stone. Faith is not about seeing the rain, it's about preparing for it. Your harvest will come, but the true test has just begun. The wind howled around him, bending branches and stirring the earth beneath his knees. Jacob's mind raced with questions. What test? Hadn't he already been tested enough? He looked up at the sky, the raindrops blurring his vision. He wanted answers. He wanted to understand why this was happening. Why now, after all these years of struggle, rain had come with a message that made no sense. Clutching the paper tightly, Jacob stood and turned toward the house. The ground beneath his feet felt different. Softer, alive. The rain wasn't just wetting the surface, it was seeping deep, breaking through the years of drought like a long-forgotten promise. His steps quickened as he reached the porch and pushed the door open. Anna met him with wide, hopeful eyes. Jacob, the rain. It's finally here. He nodded, breathing heavily. Yeah, it's here. But something's not right. Anna frowned. What do you mean? He handed her the soaked parchment. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words. Her face paled. A test? What kind of test? Jacob shook his head. I don't know. But whatever it is, it hasn't happened yet. Samuel appeared in the hallway, rubbing his eyes. Papa? Why are you scared? Jacob knelt in front of his son, forcing a smile. I'm not scared, buddy. Just surprised. The rain came, just like you prayed for. Samuel's face lit up. God heard me. He ran to the window, pressing his hands against the glass. Now the seeds will grow. Jacob stood slowly, his gaze shifting from his son to the rain-soaked fields beyond the window. The boy's faith was so pure, so certain. For Samuel there was no question, just belief. But Jacob couldn't silence the unease that clawed at him. The hours passed, the rain falling steadily. By morning, puddles had formed across the fields, and the earth, once cracked and stubborn, now looked soft and inviting. Jacob went out to inspect the soil. His boots sank slightly with each step, and when he knelt to touch the ground, he felt moisture deep below the surface. The seeds they had planted weeks ago, despite his doubts, were now surrounded by the water they desperately needed. As he ran his fingers through the wet soil, something sharp pricked his palm. He winced and pulled his hand back. A thin, rusted nail jutted from the earth. Jacob dug around it and unearthed an old, broken horseshoe. He turned it over in his hands. It was unfamiliar, something that didn't belong to his land. Its surface was etched with faint, swirling patterns, similar to the symbols on the lockbox from the night before. His pulse quickened. Was this the test? Strange objects appearing on his land after the rain? He tossed the horseshoe aside and stood, glancing toward the oak tree. It stood tall and motionless in the distance, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching him. That night, the wind shifted, colder than before. The steady rhythm of the rain grew erratic, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Jacob sat by the fireplace while Anna and Samuel slept. The lockbox lay on the table before him, empty except for the memory of the cryptic message. Suddenly, the flames in the fireplace flickered, then roared higher, casting shadows across the walls. Jacob stood, heart racing. The shadows twisted and shifted, forming the outline of a familiar figure. The old man. Jacob's fists clenched. What do you want from me? The shadow's mouth moved, though the voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The rain came. The land is ready. But faith is not proven in comfort, Jacob. It is forged in fear. Jacob's breathing quickened. What does that mean? What fear? The shadow shifted, pointing toward the window. Jacob followed its gaze. Outside, beneath the oak tree, stood Samuel. The boy was barefoot, his pajamas soaked through, his head tilted upward as if listening to someone unseen. Panic surged through Jacob. He bolted for the door, throwing it open as rain lashed against his face. "Samuel!" he shouted, sprinting toward the tree. The mud sucked at his boots, slowing his steps. His son stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the branches above. "Samuel, come here!" Jacob shouted, grabbing his arm. Samuel didn't move. His eyes were unfocused, his lips slightly parted. Jacob shook him. "Samuel! Wake up!" The boy blinked, his eyes clearing. "Papa?" His voice trembled. Jacob pulled him into his arms. "I'm here. I've got you. Why did you come out here?" Samuel buried his face in his father's shoulder. I heard a voice. It said the tree was the key. I tried not to go, but my legs, they moved on their own." Jacob's stomach dropped. He looked up at the oak tree. The branches, slick with rain, swayed slightly in the wind. But at its center, near the trunk, he saw it, a hollow that hadn't been there before. It was wide and dark, like an open mouth. The wind whispered around them, carrying a voice that only Jacob could hear. The test begins when fear takes root. What will you sacrifice for faith? Jacob's grip on Samuel tightened. His instincts screamed to run back to the house, lock the doors, and protect his family. But his mind raced with the old man's warning. If this was the test, running wouldn't solve it. He carried Samuel back inside. Anna met them at the door, her face pale. What happened? Jacob set Samuel down and placed the rusted key on the table. The tree. It's changing. Anna's eyes filled with fear. Jacob, maybe we shouldn't. A deafening crack interrupted her. The sound of splintering would echoed across the fields. They rushed to the window. The oak tree was splitting down the middle, its trunk splitting like a wound. From the crack emerged something metallic, glinting in the moonlight. Jacob's heart raced. The tree was revealing something. But what? And why now? The whisper returned, louder this time. Faith is tested in sacrifice. What will you give to save what you love? Jacob's hands trembled. The lockbox, the nail, the key, they had all led to this moment. The rain had come, but the true storm was only just beginning. And at the heart of it stood a choice he wasn't ready to make. The crack in the oak tree continued to grow, splintering down the trunk with a sound like thunder. Jacob's eyes widened as the metallic object emerged, its form now clear under the moonlight. It was a large, ornate chest, half buried in the roots of the tree. The rain fell harder, but the chest remained untouched by the downpour, as if protected by something unseen. Jacob's breath hitched. "What is this?" he murmured, stepping closer to the window. Anna, standing behind him, gripped his arm. "Jacob, don't go near it. Please. This isn't right." He turned to face her, his eyes filled with an urgency he couldn't quite explain. "It's not just the tree, Anna. This chest, this storm, it's all connected. Whatever's happening, it's happening because we're being tested." Samuel, still standing near the door, looked out at the oak. "Papa, look." His voice quivered. "The tree, it's alive." Jacob's heart raced. The oak wasn't just splitting, it was growing, reshaping itself. The roots twisted and writhed beneath the earth like serpents, pulling the chest further from the soil and into the air. As the chest rose, it seemed to glow, faintly at first, then more brightly, casting an eerie light across the fields. The shadows around the house stretched long and dark, as if the night itself was creeping closer. Without thinking, Jacob bolted out the door, his feet slipping in the mud. The wind howled, pushing him forward as though urging him to reach the chest. His hands shook, his mind clouded with a mix of fear and determination. Every step felt like a step into the unknown. As he neared the tree, the air grew thick, suffocating. He could feel something pulling at him, an unseen force drawing him closer to the chest. His heart pounded, and his breath quickened. He had to know what was inside. He had to understand what this was about. The chest hovered in the air now, suspended by the gnarled roots of the oak tree. It seemed to pulse with energy, like it was alive, waiting. Jacob reached out, his hand trembling as it hovered just above the chest. Then, something strange happened. The moment his fingers brushed the cold metal, the world around him went still. The rain stopped, the wind ceased, and for a moment, there was an eerie calm. The only sound was the rapid beating of his heart. Jacob pulled his hand back quickly, staring at the chest. For a moment, he thought he saw something, or someone, inside. A face, distorted and shadowed, appeared through the metal, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "Jacob," a voice whispered, barely audible, like a distant echo. He froze, unable to move, unable to speak. The voice felt familiar, yet foreign, like a memory just out of reach. The wind picked up again, howling through the trees, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble. The chest shook, the roots of the tree twisting and contorting as if trying to pull it back into the earth. A terrible realization dawned on Jacob. The chest wasn't just a treasure, it was a prison. Something was trapped inside. He stumbled backward, his pulse racing. But before he could turn and run, the voice came again, clearer this time. "Jacob, you have opened the door. Now, you must choose." His head spun, and he stumbled, nearly falling to the ground. "Choose? Choose what? The chest continued to glow, its light intensifying as the rain began to fall harder, almost violently. The storm was no longer a simple downpour. It had become a torrent, a fury of nature that felt as though it was being pulled into this one moment. Then, through the chaos, Jacob heard it, a low growl, deep and primal. His eyes widened as the ground shook beneath his feet. The roots of the oak tree were no longer just twisting, they were alive. They began to writhe and shift, stretching toward him like fingers reaching for a final grasp. His breath caught in his throat. He turned and ran, but the tree's roots surged toward him, pushing the chest higher into the air. The wind screamed, the rain lashing against his skin like needles. The sky itself seemed to be closing in. Behind him, Anna's voice rang out, desperate and filled with terror. Jacob, come back. He couldn't stop. His legs were heavy, the weight of the rain and the storm making every step feel like a battle. The roots snapped at his heels, missing by mere inches. He didn't dare look back, but he could hear the tree's eerie growls, louder now, as if it was calling to him. Samuel's voice pierced through the storm. Papa! Jacob's heart clenched. He couldn't leave them. He couldn't let this force destroy everything they had fought for. But what was he supposed to do? What was this test? The chest trembled once more, and for a brief moment, Jacob thought he saw it opening, the lid lifting slowly like a mouth preparing to speak. The light inside pulsed with a rhythm, matching the pounding of his heart. He reached the porch, his hands slick with rain as he grabbed the doorframe for support. He turned to look back one last time. The oak tree was now fully twisted, its branches reaching out like the arms of some monstrous creature. The chest hovered above the ground, glowing brighter than before, the dark face inside still watching him, waiting. Suddenly, the voice spoke again, sharp and clear. You have been chosen. Jacob's pulse quickened. Chosen for what? He gasped, his mind racing, the weight of the storm pressing down on him. The air around him crackled. And then, as if answering his question, the ground trembled once more, and the chest began to fall. But it wasn't just the chest. It was everything. The earth beneath his feet. The sky above. Everything was shifting, changing. And he didn't know if he had the strength to withstand whatever was about to happen next. Behind him, Anna and Samuel huddled together in the doorway, their faces pale and filled with fear. Jacob couldn't look away from the tree. Whatever was happening, it was growing more dangerous by the second. The storm wasn't just a test, it was the beginning of something far worse. The chest crashed to the ground, sending a shockwave through the earth. Jacob gasped as he felt something inside himself break. The ground cracked open beneath him, and the rain stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. The choice had been made. The chest hit the ground with a deafening thud, the earth beneath it cracking open like an ancient wound. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Jacob stood frozen, staring at the chest, its lid now cracked slightly open, a faint, ominous glow spilling from within. The roots of the oak tree, now twisted and contorted like something alive, recoiled as if afraid of what was about to emerge. Behind him, Anna and Samuel stood on the porch, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. Jacob! Anna shouted, her voice barely audible over the deafening wind. What's happening? What did you do? Jacob couldn't answer. The voice from the chest echoed in his mind once again, clearer this time. The choice is made. The earth has been awakened. You cannot undo what has begun. He felt the ground beneath his feet tremble, a deep, unsettling hum vibrating through the soil. The storm had stopped, replaced by an eerie calm that made everything feel impossibly still, as though the world itself was waiting for something to happen. The oak tree, now fully alive, seemed to watch him with its twisted, gnarled branches reaching out like fingers. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest. What had he awakened? What had he chosen? He turned to face Anna, his mind racing. We have to leave. Now. This isn't just about us anymore. Anna looked at him, panic in her eyes. Leave? Jacob, what do you mean? We're already caught in this. Whatever this is. Jacob glanced at Samuel, who stood silently beside his mother, his innocent face filled with confusion. Jacob couldn't let this destroy his family. He had to make it stop. But how? How could he undo something that felt like it was tied to the very land beneath them, to the forces they had never fully understood? The glow from the chest intensified, and a low, guttural growl rumbled from within. Jacob took a hesitant step forward, drawn to the chest like a moth to a flame. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they brushed the lid. The moment he touched it, the earth beneath him shifted violently. The ground cracked open wider, sending jagged splinters of rock and dirt shooting into the air. A blinding light erupted from the chest, and a figure stepped out of the blinding glow. It was human, or at least it looked human at first, but its skin was dark as coal, its eyes glowing like embers. Its presence radiated an overwhelming power, something ancient and terrifying. Jacob staggered back, his heart racing. What are you? The figure turned its glowing eyes toward him, its voice deep and rumbling, like a storm rolling in. I am what was buried, what was forgotten. The test was not for you, Jacob. It was for your land. For all of you. Jacob felt his legs weaken. We didn't ask for this. We didn't want any of this. The figure tilted its head, its expression unreadable. You opened the door, Jacob. Your faith, your doubt, they gave me life. And now, the choice you made has awakened what should never have been disturbed. Jacob's mind raced. He remembered the rusted nail, the broken horseshoe, the lockbox, the rain, the oak tree. All of it connected. The test. He had been so focused on the idea of faith, the notion of sacrifice, that he hadn't seen the bigger picture. The figure stepped forward, its form shifting like smoke, and reached a hand toward Jacob. You will now witness the true cost of your faith. Jacob's breath caught in his throat as he felt something shift inside him. Something dark, something ancient. His body screamed for him to run, but his legs were rooted to the spot. The land had claimed him. Just as the figure's hand was about to touch him, the world around them seemed to shift. The oak tree groaned, its branches creaking and bending. And then, in a blinding flash of light, the figure vanished. The chest, too, disappeared into the earth. Jacob collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. The world around him was still. The storm had passed, and the earth beneath him no longer trembled. It was as if nothing had happened at all. But he knew that wasn't true. Anna rushed to his side, helping him to his feet. Jacob, what just happened? What was that thing? Jacob shook his head, his mind racing. I don't know. But whatever it was, it's not over. Samuel looked up at his father, his innocent eyes searching Jacob's face. Papa, is the land okay now? Jacob didn't know how to answer. The land, the oak tree, the storm, they had all been part of something far greater than he could ever have imagined. And though the immediate danger seemed to have passed, the feeling that something was still watching, still waiting, lingered in the air like a heavy fog. Anna turned toward the fields, her eyes scanning the horizon. The crops, they're growing. Jacob looked over at the fields. Despite everything that had happened, the ground was now rich and fertile. The rain had brought new life, and the seeds they had planted were sprouting, green and strong. But then something caught his eye. A small, glimmering object near the base of the oak tree. Hesitant, he walked toward it, his feet heavy with dread. As he bent down to pick it up, he froze. It was the horseshoe. But now, it was different. It wasn't rusted anymore. It was brand new, shining with an unnatural light. Jacob felt his stomach drop. The twist, the unexpected turn of fate, had come not with the figure's departure, but with the lingering presence of the object in his hand. It wasn't just a relic. It was a key. The final key to something that had yet to unfold. And as Jacob stood there, staring at the horseshoe, he realized that the storm had never truly ended. It had only begun. Jacob stood frozen, holding the gleaming horseshoe in his hand. The moonlight seemed to shine brighter on it now, almost as if it were alive, radiating a subtle warmth. He could feel its power pulsing in his palm, and though it should have comforted him, a deep, unsettling sense of dread crawled up his spine. Anna stepped up beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jacob, what does this mean? What is it?" He didn't answer immediately. His mind raced, pieces of the puzzle falling into place, everything that had happened since the storm had arrived, since the oak tree had split open. The storm had been more than just a weather pattern. It was a force tied to the land, to their family, and to something far older than anything he had ever imagined. The glow from the horseshoe flickered, casting long shadows across the ground. Jacob's heart pounded as the realization hit him. The storm, the chest, the oak tree, it had all been connected, yes, but not in the way he had thought. The true test hadn't been one of faith or doubt, not exactly. It was a test of choice, of balance. The land was alive, ancient and powerful, but it had been dormant for centuries. It had needed something, or someone, to awaken it. He turned the horseshoe over in his hand, the cold metal feeling strangely warm now. This was never just about us. We were part of something bigger. The storm, it was a warning, a reminder that the land has its own power, its own life. We awakened it. But it's still waiting. It hasn't decided whether we're worthy. Anna's eyes widened. What does that mean? You said the storm was over. That thing, that creature, it left. The trees stopped moving. What more can there be? Jacob took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the truth settling on his shoulders. It's not over. Not yet. That creature. I think it was a guardian, a protector of the land. It wasn't here to destroy us. It was here to see if we were strong enough, if we truly understood the power of the land we tend to. We opened the door, but we haven't fully walked through it. The horseshoe seemed to hum in his hand, its energy pulsating with an almost magnetic force. This is the key, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. It's the key to whether we stay, whether we get to keep this land, this life. Whether we're worthy of it. Anna took a step back, her gaze flicking from the horseshoe to the distant fields, now bathed in the soft glow of the rising sun. The rain had stopped, the clouds breaking apart as the first light of day began to paint the sky in hues of orange and gold. But something felt different, like the air itself had changed. There was an energy to it that hadn't been there before. We've always worked hard, Jacob, Anna said, her voice firm but filled with a kind of quiet strength. We've put everything we have into this farm, into this land. We've given it our love, our sweat. We didn't ask for this, but we won't back down now. Whatever the land asks of us, we will give it. Jacob looked at her, his heart swelling with pride. His wife, his rock, had always been the steady force in their lives. She had been the one who believed when things seemed impossible. She had believed when he had doubted, when he had lost faith. We're not alone in this, Anna, Jacob said softly. We're together. This land, this life, it's ours. But we can't take it for granted. We have to protect it, respect it. They both turned toward the fields. The crops had sprung up overnight, healthy and vibrant. The earth, once dry and cracked, now seemed alive, pulsing with the new energy that had been awakened. Yet, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered, something not fully understood. Papa! Samuel's voice cut through the silence, and the young boy ran toward them, his feet splashing through the mud. His wide eyes were filled with curiosity and wonder. Is it over? Are we safe? Jacob knelt down to meet his son's gaze. For now, yes, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But we have to stay vigilant, Samuel. The land is powerful, and we have to be worthy of it. Samuel nodded seriously, as if understanding the weight of his father's words. Jacob smiled, ruffling his son's hair before standing up and turning his attention back to the farm. The morning sunlight washed over the land, casting a golden hue on everything. It felt like a new beginning, but Jacob knew better than to believe everything was settled. There was still the unknown, still the ever-present hum of energy that seemed to vibrate beneath his feet. As the day went on, Jacob found himself walking the fields with a renewed sense of purpose. He had always loved working the land, always taken pride in it, but now there was a deeper connection, a stronger bond. The storm had taught him that everything in life was a balance. Faith and doubt, light and dark, creation and destruction. The land had its own rhythm, its own cycle, and he had to listen. They all did. By the time the sun set, the horseshoe was safely placed in the small wooden chest on the mantel, glowing faintly with its mysterious energy. Jacob stood in front of it for a moment, his reflection visible in the dark wood of the chest. He felt the weight of the choice he had made, the cost of awakening something so powerful. But he also felt something else, a sense of peace, a quiet assurance that they had made the right decision. He turned and walked back to his family. Anna and Samuel were sitting by the fire, the warmth of the flames casting dancing shadows on their faces. The world outside was quiet now, the storm a distant memory. "We'll be okay, Jacob," Anna said, her voice calm, her eyes filled with love. Jacob smiled, the weight of the horseshoe no longer a burden. It was a reminder of their strength, of their connection to the land, and of the choices they made together. For the first time in a long while, Jacob felt at peace. The storm had passed, the land had been tested, and they had come out stronger together. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was also full of possibility. And that, in itself, was the greatest gift. As he settled down beside Anna and Samuel, Jacob knew that no matter what came next, they would face it as a family, as stewards of the land, with hearts full of faith, respect, and love. The storm had shown them their true strength, and they were ready for whatever the future might hold.